Bailey's point is that anything that she deemed newsworthy and assigned was the other material that was going to get covered in the Cardinal. Thinking that one could just assign news is naive, and that doesn't represent the internet generation, since anybody who's got a smartphone and an internet connection had the capability to be citizen journalists, and fairly effective ones at that. Jonathan Dooley's Labor Union Forum article, Occupy Louisville article, and the business of September 20th, 2011 SGA was the 3 articles that was the excuse that they used to fire me. But those weren't the only articles that they censored. But they weren't the only articles that were censored. In fact, every article that I gave them was cut up in some shape, way, or form. So even if they bothered to run it, it would still be censored, every one of them. And there are other articles that wasn't published too. Bailey's main point is that if she doesn't assign the stories, therefore the story isn't relevant. But she did assign 2 of them, 2 to 3. But by Bailey's very definition of news, 9/11 wouldn't have been covered in the Cardinal, since there's no way to predict a week prior that 9/11 was going to happen. So it's foolish. Of course 9/11 is news. News is any information that is relevant to the individual student. Walter Cronkite once says that the news is anything that he says it is. And that's exactly what the Cardinal's doing. Which is exactly what the Cardinal is doing, because that's why you don't have any relevant conversations about finances, the availability of scholarships, and student complaints aren't being heard. Also, the Cardinal hasn't said anything about the global revolution that's confronting economic inequality right now. The Cardinal doesn't understand struggle. They need to read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and some Howard Zinn and Chomsky. So even though the Cardinal had censored my articles and didn't publish it in the paper, I published it on Facebook. And then after they fired me, they told me that I need to take the stories down. After they fired me for breach of contract, they then ordered me to take it down. So they think that if you're working for them that they actually own your thoughts. Any conversation, if you type it from, if you hear about a piece of news and you Facebook status to somebody else, is that allowed? Anyways, the amount of information that was censored from the student body was vast. The business of U of L's SGA September 20th meeting was censored and suppressed. I wrote up an article which started out with how Maverick Senator Skylar Grodick of the SGA had tried to introduce a bill that confronts overbearing professors, which he says was largely symbolic to let professors know that SGA is watching them on behalf of the students. And he also, a bill to extend discussion in the Senate. But while he was introducing this bill, 48 of Senator Grodick's comrades sat silent, and they snickered and they rolled their eyes, and they wasn't supportive of any words that Senator Skylar Grodick spoke about, including interrupting him with incorrect parliamentary procedure. And then the 48-member Senate wouldn't vote on any of his motions or any of his proposals, but they did, in the middle of his presentation, vote to end the meeting within 15 minutes. So, and then eventually all of his bills were buried in committee. But you, the common, regular, hardworking U of L student, never got to hear about that. You never got to hear about that. Other SGA business that you never got to hear about, the SGA passed a resolution to hire an advancement placement officer for SGA, which they're still deciding on. And when they passed it originally in September, there was a recommendation to have a pay cut from the council, but they passed it without that pay cut, 7.5% pay cut, but they passed it without it. Human Resources approved the SGA to hire an advancement placement officer, and the advancement placement officer will have a yearly salary of $55,000. The Senate voted to pay themselves 60% of their $200 yearly pay for attending regular SGA meetings, 20% for committee participation as determined by the chairman, and 10% from having to file a report at the end of the semester, and 10% for attending a resolution workshop. The sole dissenting vote came from Senator Grodick, who believed that the remuneration policy didn't hold the senators to high enough standards. 80% of SGA's pay is just attendance, says Grodick. President Curtis Frizzell announced that he is working on creating an exclusive tradition council in order to help U of L create traditions. Frizzell pitched a 5th branch for SGA called the Services Branch, President Frizzell believes that having a services branch is one way that UK's SGA was better, since UK has a services branch, then money for UK's Dance Blue and UK Fusion. So the services branch is able to have more events for the student body. K-Help has been instituted statewide, so because of U of L's SGA, our university will have lobbyists in Frankfurt to represent them. K-Help also assists with the Rally for Higher Education, which is an annual student protest in Frankfurt being held on February 7th, 2012. Next year, February 7th, the second month on the 7th, there's going to be a rally for higher education, and SGA is going to be working hard actually to get a lot of people to go. You got an excused absence. You're allowed to skip your classes on February 7th in order to go to the rally for higher education. And also, SGA is currently working on legislation for the future of Kentucky colleges. The Cardinal is a liberal gatekeeper. It's hierarchical. The Cardinal doesn't really care about the students, like myself, because if they did, then the paper wouldn't be left in large stacks. Nobody's picking up the Cardinal. So it's obvious that corruptible human beings won't check themselves, since power never checks themselves. They never do. Not Pharaoh Ramses, nor the Board of Trustees, nor the professors, the campus police. Even the West Side Dining has got some fascist Nazis working there. There is no oversight committee to make sure that the students are being represented like they should. The first time I met Bailey Pulliam was last year, when she got mad that she had heard that I was writing a letter to the editor. At first, it was a letter to the editor, then it was changed to an opinion piece. And it was about how 33% of American college students weren't learning any critical thinking. And she had thought that since she had written a news article about it, that's why my opinion piece shouldn't get published. She had already wrote about it, so therefore I wasn't able to write about it. So the first time she met me, she was already jealous. She was already trying to suppress the article. She was trying to say that it had already been covered. Since in his opinion piece, that would give it a different flavor. I could say, you know, and I did say a lot of things, you know, on behalf of how that study was incorrect. But that's appalling. 33% of college students, after they graduate, 4 years, don't know critical thinking. So after I hounded the Cardinal for months and I rewrote that piece like 7 different times, eventually I got a sanitized version in it, and they still censored it. Even though I even mentioned censorship in the article. The biggest point that I made was how 2 out of 5 Kentuckians cannot read, which came from a governor of Kentucky, Paul Patton's task force committee. And that was the one sentence that they cut out of the piece. So even then they cut out a piece. And since then, every piece that I've turned in has been cut up. The Nazi-ship of the Cardinal is only there to steal your ideas and then to silence you into irrelevancy. Bailey Pulliam is a corporate gatekeeper. And the first conversation that I had with her on staff was about news. And I asked her what her definition of news was. And I give an example. If I was to come across a sex scandal by the president, would that be news? And immediately she's like, no, no, no. So even though a sex scandal was able to take down the president of the United States, the president of the university was being protected. She did admit, though, if there was a mass killing spree, that I could cover that. But that's the only one that, unless she had assigned it, that would be the only thing, a news story to that extent that I could write about on my own. So in the very beginning, she says that a sex scandal was not to be written about. Even though Herman Cain, Julian Assange, Paterno of the Catholic Church, a whole bunch of Republican politicians, and others, it takes down those, but she didn't think that would be newsworthy. I disagree. Under Bailey's leadership, it seems like they're already posed to protect the establishment. I mean, they'll cover the Gaydar application, the app on iPhone, but they won't ask Pharaoh Ramses any hard questions. The Cardinal is a corporate gatekeeper. The truth about Occupy Louisville, which contains lots of U of L students. Occupy Louisville, I would say started by a lot of students. I don't know if you could actually have one founder or not. And then the Louisville Labor Unions Forum, which would provided a lot of future leaders for good jobs. I would like to get a job with the labor unions. So since the Cardinal didn't cover it, you didn't get to hear about that. And also SGA, so they didn't cover the government representative body for students. The main advocate body for students was not covered. So the students, the Cardinal and SGA, they all seem to be separate and independent, and none of them are interfering with the other's affairs. and everybody, including the students who are sleeping, seems satisfied with this arrangement. The New York Times pointed out that labor unions are starting to get on board with Occupy Wall Street. But what's good for the Times evidently isn't good enough for the Cardinal. They censored the sections about the university's budget. I pointed out that the $600,000 for SGA paled in comparison to the other items on the budget. And I listed a bunch of them. I can only remember administrative services right now, which is so vague. So there's plenty of opportunity for wasteful spending. And the administration, the university budget, is in the millions of dollars. So they're ready to protect Keem Ramses with their lives, but for working people and for the students, they could give a damn less.